Good evening and a happy Labor Day to you. Welcome to the special edition of RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you're enjoying this holiday Monday. Well, tonight, in honor of Labor Day, we are dedicating the first part of our program to look at the labor movement in America, both past, present, as well as future. And later, as students head back to school, a special report about the continuing religious, fiscal, and educational concerns in the East Ramapo district in Rockland County. But we begin with a look back at the seminal moment in American labor history, the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. And our senior political correspondent, Andrew Whitman, filed that report. Andrew?
Well, Richard, it can't be overstated the importance of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire and what happened after when it comes to the rise of the American labor movement. It was the catalyst for the labor movement and the rise of labor unions. And with unions came the drives for better workplace safety, better pay, collective bargaining, child labor laws, and much, much more. Those changes, in turn, fueled the development of the American middle class, which helped push the United States to its position of world prominence it continues to enjoy today. But it all began with one of the worst workplace disasters in American history. So now an encore presentation of my award-winning special report, the 100th anniversary of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. And now, as it aired March 27, 2011, Lessons from the Ashes, the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire.
Even now, 100 years later, it is hard to grasp. In just 18 minutes, the fast-moving fire took 146 souls, most women, many just teenagers.
Anna Altman, 16.
Tilly Kupperschmidt, 16.
Yetta Berger, 18.
Annie Labette, 16.
And their deaths were horrible. Some trapped next to exit doors, others died clinging to the roofs of elevators, and still more jumped 9 or 10 floors, knowing they would likely not survive.
The sheer terror these women must have been facing, to choose between burning to death in a building with no protection, no one, to help them or save them, or to jump out the window, knowing, because others had jumped before them, that that was it.
Such young workers, and primarily female workers, such young women in the flower of their lives, to have their lives cut short in such great numbers is so tragic.
A century later, the questions remain fresh. Why did so many people die so quickly? Why were so many women and so many girls put in that position? Why would they choose to work in an environment they knew was unsafe, that they thought could kill them? And why would the factory's owners put them in that position?
Essie Bernstein, 19.
Kate Leone, 14.
Sarah Brinman, 17.
Any attempt to understand the Triangle Fire has to begin with the state of the economy and the garment industry in the 1900s. The shirtwaist, a feminine tailored blouse that wore more like a men's shirt, had been in vogue for more than a decade, but its popularity was beginning to wane. With sales slowing and competition increasing, factory owners like Triangle's Max Blank and Isaac Harris had only one way to keep their companies profitable.
There's not a lot of investment in technology. The raw materials are the raw materials. The designs are the designs. The only way to make a difference in to make the profit is to lower labor costs, hence sweating workers.
That meant cheap labor in factories designed for productivity and savings above all. Hundreds of workers crammed into tiny rooms, sewing machines from wall to wall with little space to move, snips of fabric left everywhere, and employees who would work for pennies.
It meant 12-hour days, often 6 days a week. In a good day, it might be $1.50 to $2 a day, but workers were charged for electricity that they used, thread, needles, and any damaged documents garments came right out of their salary.
And to keep workers from stealing, they were searched before going home, and stairwell doors were kept locked. The emphasis always on the bottom line and not on the workers.
It would be impossible to be a manufacturer at that time in that sector of the economy, and to be what we would think of as moral and ethical in your behavior.
Despite the factory conditions and low pay, finding workers was easy. Immigration into New York was booming, and for women who had trouble speaking the language or had few skills, the garment industry was a perfect fit.
Garment work was an entry-level skill, so anyone could walk into the factory and start out. as maybe the person who snipped the threads off the clothing before they went on the truck.
There is a ready supply of cheap labor. There are many more people looking for jobs than there are jobs.
And those jobs often stayed in the immigrant communities. In the garment business of the 1900s, that meant mostly women from southern Italy and Jews from across Europe. Friends would bring friends into the shops, and family members too.
A foreman would say to a very good worker who was impressing them, do you have a sister or a cousin that you can, someone from your town or village that you could bring in who's just like you? It meant that they had a hold on those workers a little bit more because their family members would keep them in line.
But it also allowed even more exploitation. Bosses making passes at the girls, some of whom were as young as 12 or 13. And what could they do? What would you do if saying no meant your whole family would lose their jobs? For years, that's how the garment industry worked. But in September of 1909, a year and a half before the fire, that began to change. At least, it changed for some.
40,000 people, they marched.
It was known as the Uprising of the 20,000, the largest work movement by women in the nation's history. Garment workers at shops across the city took to the streets demanding better pay, shorter hours, and improved working conditions. The walkout was more or less spontaneous, but striking workers found support in the streets from community activists and from something relatively new, a labor union.
And they're met with violence. Shops hired prostitutes to break up the picket line. All the workers and the prostitutes would get arrested. The company would bail out the prostitutes, and no one bailed out the workers.
But within 3 months, something unexpected started to happen. The strike began to work.
Some of the smaller shops whose profit margins are really not, there, begin to take work.
Improving work hours and pay and making the factories safer. There was a fateful exception.
Except for one of the bigger shops in New York City, the Triangle Shop, did not settle. It didn't have to.
Coming up, we'll show you exactly what happened to Triangle Shirtwaist and how the aftermath helped to kickstart the labor movement in America.